Peace to you home. My name is Philin, and I do not yihist. Everything you hear in this video is the personal opinion of the author, who does not claim to be truthful. Nor to change your personal opinion, it is better to verify than to take it at face value. After all, practice is the criterion of truth. Let's ponder the future. About the configuration of the word that is emerging from the perspective of the beginning of the year 2020. First, I want to note that everything happening in the world is not accidental. The world is infinite and whole, and there are not so incidents in it. No one starts military actions due to a bad mood, and financial crises do not receive from overindulgence. All these actions are well and carefully planned, and what we call black swans are simply events that we cannot predict. Their ability to identify trends and interconnections depends on a person's worldview. If a person has its replique, leadership its worldview, then the world appears chaotic to term, and events so it seem random. However, if a person has a mosaic worldview that emphasizes a holistic picture, then the world appears as interconnected, managed, and planned events. Let's begin our examination from the top level, the level of global politics. In governance, what happens at the top level defines and sets the framework for what will occur at the lower levels. If in 2022 there were two basic scenarios, a transition to a world of inclusive capitalism promoted by Klaus Schwab, and a transition to a world of macro-regions, pan-regions, macro-regions, or a world of empires, by 2026 it became clear that the second scenario was becoming dominant. While the scenario of a world of inclusive capitalism now has minimal probabilities, there are quite a few names for this word. Choose any that you like. The only request is not to confuse it with the so-called multipolar world. The multipolar world, where several centers of power try to manage a single entity, is an intermediate, unstable state that is impossible in the long term. As the saying goes, with 7 nannies, the child is blind. Ultimately, such a configuration inevitably falls apart, and the world divides into isolated regions. By the year 2026, events occurring in the territory of the former Ukraine and Iran have shown that the project of inclusive capitalism, although still theoretical as a barrel, is already extremely unlikely. In effect, for the next 10 years, we are entering a phase of building a world of regions. It is important to remember that when strategizing, time is not an objective parameter, and we use it only as a reference measure. It is also important to understand that the future is multivariate, and in this case, we are talking about the most likely scenario as of today. As of today, new centers of management concentration are already emerging, which will build their regions. These are Russia, China, India, Brazil, the United States of America, and the new British Empire. As of today, we can only talk about the formation of management centers, but the borders of these regions are not yet clear and will be determined in the course of the historical process and the results of confrontations. In some cases, the borders are more defined, while in others, they are in the process of formation and is likely to be a region unto itself, with limited expansion into neighboring territories. The Russian Empire, in the broader sense of the word, will take Eastern Europe. However, the Anatolian Peninsula remains very much in question, a subject of struggle and bargaining. Europe as a whole is undergoing a reformatting with the formation of new nations and identities, including the active participation of migrants. Ultimately, it will be divided between Russia and a new British Empire with the establishment of a buffer regional state between them. In effect, in Europe, we will still see a confrontation over the Balkans, which will involve both the Balkan countries themselves and nearby ones, such as Bulgaria. In addition to regions, regional alliances of states will be formed. Economically, they will be linked to one or several regions, but politically they will have a high degree of freedom. Such formations are already emerging, like a new Austro-Hungarian Empire, which will likely include several other countries, such as Italy, the Czech Republic, and considerably more. Iran, which has not yet been able to elevate its status to a full-fledged region after its confrontation with the United States and Israel, is likely to strengthen its sovereignty and may become a regional state or even a region. A major question remains regarding the African continent. South Africa has not been able to grow even to the level of a regional state, let alone a full-fledged region. However, it is quite possible for a regional alliance to form among the states of North Africa, which will take on the role of the core. The process of forming regions occurs instable, and the transition of a particular territory will depend on local realities, whether it will be peaceful or resolved through military means. There will be countries that will not survive the process of changing the world, such as Israel, which has largely determined its fate through its behavior in Gaza, and will either be completely eliminated or undergo reformatting with a change in ideology and meaning of existence. As for Turkey, the question remains open. The policy pursued by Ada's leadership is aimed at preserving the state, while the aspiration towards the project of a great Turkic state is destructive, and following it will lead to the liquidation of the modern state. Some of the most interesting events in the next 5 years will unfold around the division of the systems of Britain and the USA. Today, Britain and the USA are manifestations of a single imperial center, which is already transforming from a unified entity into various empires. Starting around the 30th year, the center of tension will become the confrontation between the USA and China in the Pacific region. Today, the USA and China are two sides of the same coin. China produces goods that the USA consumes, while the world of regions demands the realization of the slogan "Make America Great Again," the return of production to the USA, and the demarcation from China with the formation of various regions. In effect, for China, the Taiwan issue is not an existential problem. It will eventually become part of China sooner or later, and there is not much sense in hastening events. For both China and the United States, the formation of the periphery in Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and other territories of the Pacific region is much more important. Each region will have its own ideology, some will be similar, and some will differ significantly. And of course, there is a possibility that one of the candidates for regional leadership may not survive the competitive struggle, and in that case there are other options, but for now, the picture is forming this way. The dynamics of a society are such that with the increasing confrontation in the Pacific region, it is very likely that the taboo on the use of tactical nuclear weapons will be overcome. In the future, this type of weapon may transition from a tool of deterrence to a category of conventional weapons. Military technologies will move towards robotization. The use of armored systems are born, naval and ground-based will increase, their operational range will expand, and the share of robotic equipment on the battlefield will gradually transition of the world from one state to another is accompanied by a cycle of wars. The current cycle of wars began in the Middle East, in Syria, and continues now. In the next decade, the most intense confrontations are likely to occur in the Pacific region, where high population density combines with the absence, unlike Europe, of stable historical spheres of influence. No one can tell you exactly when a particular confrontation will end, because in strategizing there are only states of systems. For example, the policy of the Atlantic Bloc regarding their tool for conducting global policy in relation to former Ukraine is such that the confrontation will only end with the complete loss of former Ukraine's ability to resist. Armed conflicts very rarely end with any agreements. In the overwhelming majority of cases, they conclude with the formal or informal capitulation of one of the parties. At the same time, all the territory of former Ukraine will be absorbed by Russia either at once or in parts, with the temporary existence of buffer, gray zones. It is also impossible to say, because this decision will be made by a group of individuals based on the conditions that exist at that moment. The same can be said about Iran. As of today, the goals of the United States have been achieved, but a lauded victory is necessary for formal capitulation and to withdrawal from the region, such as a short-term ground operation that will be presented as victorious but will actually have no real effect. In the modern world, it is simply not possible to film such an operation in a studio and pass it off as truth. The same applies to future wars, including in Europe. The subject of future confrontation between Europe and Russia in the form of the rocky gap already exists, but when the confrontation itself will begin will be determined based on the state of the systems.